Hey everybody now, welcome to Live on Four Legs, the definitive live Pearl Jam podcast. This week's episode will be a little bit different than most. While we may not make an attempt to be the definitive baseball podcast, on the eve of opening day, we're going to do a deep dive exploring the connection that Pearl Jam has with baseball. Every spring is a new beginning. For some, it's escaping the doldrums of winter and looking forward to the flowers blooming and warm weather. No matter how cold winter, there's a springtime ahead. For others, it's finding routine again. For 162 days between March and September, and a handful more for those lucky enough to cheer in October, life is consumed by what 9 men can do with a ball and a stick. Those moments that you experience can be some of the highest of highs, and ultimately, every season has its crushing blows. But you return year after year because it's become a part of your blood, part of your DNA, part of your traditions, and for better or worse, part of your mental psyche. It's that feeling of exhilaration that you can't help but chase that's no different than following your favorite band on multiple stops per tour. Seeing the green grass on a field has the same impact as seeing those bright lights beam down on a stage. When the spotlight shines the brightest, you hold your breath and wait for a moment to arise. A big-time Mike McCready solo can feel as breathtaking as a majestic Aaron Judge home run. The endorphins are released, and it's the feeling of being able to share it with those witnessing alongside you that you just can't shake. The connections that a band like Pearl Jam has to a game like baseball are not necessarily unique, but it's for those reasons that make them special. Music and baseball are two things that I was introduced to at a very early age that are still passions of mine decades into life, and it's abundantly clear that the story is the same for somebody like Eddie Vedder. My father grew up in the 50s, an era which many consider to be baseball's golden age. Like everyone in his neighborhood, he owned a black and white TV, and he watched the Brooklyn Dodgers for many summers. When he was young, his father took him to Ebbets Field to see the Dodgers play in person for the first time, and he was awestruck when the bright colors of the grass did not match up with a concrete field he watched at home. Growing up as a Cubs fan, Vedder had that exact experience, which he describes at length during a heartfelt speech that took place at his first performance at the friendly confines of Wrigley Field. Who would have thought that my father, a baby boomer well into his 70s, and Eddie, who was once considered the poster boy for Generation X, could have mirroring experiences that helped enhance their love for the game at an early age. That's the magic of baseball that connects us all. Throughout this episode, our goal is to explore how the two entities are attached. We have invited a panel of some of the most passionate people with overlapping fandoms to discuss what the music and the game has meant to them. We're also fortunate to invite some of the most profound voices and personalities from Major League Baseball who share the same passions to tell their side of the story. With all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, would you please rise and remove your caps for the shredding of our national anthem?
Please welcome Pearl Jam guitarist Mike McCready. Mike McCready, ladies and gentlemen.
Every story begins with an origin, and I'm lucky enough to say that I found part of my origin in thanks to an interconnecting devotion. In June of 2006, it was a baseball game that reintroduced me to this band and kicked off a passion that has been on a steady incline for almost 20 years. It's a story common told. In the 1990s, I was young and impressionable when I first started to figure out what music I connected with. Pearl Jam happened to be one of those bands. But as the years moved forward, my music taste did as well. It left Pearl Jam's music as nothing more than a footnote in my ever-growing discography collection. But it was at this time that they released a new record, a return to form, as many would put it. There was a buzz around them that hadn't been felt since the mid-90s, and although I wasn't fully on board just yet, they remained in my peripheral vision. I was 19 that June. A small group of acquaintances and I embarked on a trip to Toronto, Canada, mainly due to the drinking age being 18. The trip was a bit strange for me. I had been going through a difficult time managing my mental health, and I didn't feel like I was connecting with the people that I traveled alongside. One of the things that we did to pass the time was attend a series of Blue Jays games. This is the point where my life was about to take an unexpected turn. There was a first baseman for the Blue Jays by the name of Lyle Overbay, a .266 hitter over a 13-year career with no All-Star appearances and only 4 postseason at-bats to his name. 2006 may be considered his best as he hit .312 and smacked a career-high 22 home runs and 92 RBI, but it's not the statistics that I'll remember. Every time he came to the plate, I'd hear a very familiar intro during his walk-up music. It was the opening bass line to Jeremy. It was a song that I heard in my youth ad nauseum that at one point I'm sure I felt like I never needed to hear it again. But it had been quite some time since I had heard it, so in that moment, it finally felt fresh again. Over the course of my 3 games, averaging around 4 or 5 at-bats per night, I'd hear the song again and again. I found myself tapping my foot as the drums keyed in, and as the song faded out after 10 seconds during the at-home drawing pictures, I found myself wanting more. After the trip, I went home and dug out all my CDs, and it reignited the flame for a passion that has brought me to where I am today. There's symmetry in this, that one passion can open a door to lead you down a path to another. And when those passions can be blended, the heart can grow fonder. Let's now hear from our panel about their own personal experiences connecting Pearl Jam with baseball. I want to go to Aaron first because, the Cubs connection, I think, is so important in this.
I remember going to my first Cubs game. I was a little bit older than a lot of people are. Like I always was a little jealous. Like my parents weren't, they supported my wanting to play baseball. They supported my baseball card addiction, things like that. But we didn't go to a lot of games. So my first game was a class trip in 6th grade. And, I grew up with color TV, but we all remember what 80s and 90s TV was like. It wasn't exactly high def. And just the crispness of because I know several of you have been to Wrigley Field, but when you walk up those steps from the concourse, it's one of these ones where you walk up and then the field's below you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of like it's opening up and it's just spreading out in front of you. And you're just it's huge, but it's intimate. And we were lucky that it was a beautiful day. It was crisp. The greens were popping. My guy Rhino hit a home run my first game. How poetic for me, right? And then I don't know how many Cubs games I'd been to by the time Wrigley 13 happened. But walking into that and even just walking around the stadium during the day and seeing the icons and the graphics and the flag. God, I still want to get one of those flags from Wrigley 13, the big ones on the outside. I don't know whatever happened to those. They're probably all in Pearl Jam themselves hands, but that would be amazing. And walking into the field and just having all of that flat graphic design with the red, white, and black lightning bolt stuff. It was a different feeling, but it was the same feeling. It was like Wrigley was new again. I was like, this feels like the first time I've been here, but it's like I'm in some sort of weird dream. I mean, we all know the Wrigley 13 story. Like you just can't make up what happened that night. It seems like a book that the guy who wrote the Iowa Baseball Confederacy and Shoeless Joe would have written. You know, it was just amazing.
I remember, growing up, I was a Yankee fan. I'm still a Yankee fan, even though I'm repping the Pods today. It's where I live. But I remember watching on TV, and I watched almost every game as a kid, as much as I could. And the first time I can remember, because I know I was there as a baby, but I don't remember going to Yankee Stadium, walking into the stadium and being like, I don't think a kid that grows up today is going to have that same experience because the TVs are so good. It's almost like you're there when you're watching it on a giant 60-inch TV with, HD. But when you walk in, you're like, oh, the colors pop. And I remember walking out the area of the stands and seeing like just the outfield wall, the light blue in the old Yankee Stadium, light blue outfield wall, the giant red signs in the outfield. And then above that, you've got the facade in the outfield. And the colors just popped out in a way that just kind of like contrasting with the greenest grass I'd ever seen in my life. Like to this day, it's an experience I'll never forget as a kid. And it was just a magic thing to see.
I can't remember my first game. I remember a couple of very early ones, but I mean, I guess that I went from the time that I was like really, really young. So that just kind of all blends together after a while. But the thing I think I remember the most, beyond anything, and this is going to sound crazy, is that Shea Stadium, and you see all the seats. There are four different sections of seats. You have your bottom is the orange seats. That's, if you had orange seats, that was a big deal. Oh, you got good seats if you had orange seats. The blue seats, which was the second level up. And then the green seats, which were originally green because of the New York Jets that used to play there back in the 60s. And then the red seats, which they were just the cheapest nosebleed shit seats that you could imagine. But boy, were they so much fun sitting up there, going to games in college and, spending about $7 a ticket. Like you couldn't beat that. But I remember little things like on the Jumbotron, they would play these games with the seats, and every section would it be its own airplane. And it would be like, you got to fly into JFK because of all the airplanes up ahead that fly all throughout the games. Players did not want to play for the Mets because, especially pitchers, because all the planes that flew overhead throughout the game made them crazy. So there was this game that they played on the big screen where all four seating assignments, all four colors, would go up against each other. And the joke was that, you don't buy a ticket for the red seats to see your plane win. So, but I mean, there's that. And I mean, it's kind of me waxing poetic on a stadium that I haven't been to in 20 years, of course, but I'll still have dreams of, if anybody's been to Shea Stadium, you know this about Shea Stadium, walking through that concrete jungle after a game, whether it's a good win or a bad win, you're going all the way down one ramp, all the way on the other side to the bottom on the other side, and you're like just basically spanning the length of the stadium walking this ramp. It on average would take you about a good 20 minutes to go from the red seats down to the exit. And that's something that I think will always just kind of be ingrained in my memory because you're sitting there for 9 innings, especially after a loss. And, the last thing you want to do is make that walk of shame. But I remember it. I remember it. And it kind of, after a while, becomes like a point of pride.
I grew up outside of Philly, and you want to talk about terrible stadiums.
Oh, yeah.
You heard Eddie talk about when they tore down the Spectrum and they found the rats. I mean, the vet was huge. I mean, everything Randy said about the ramps, it took you forever to get to your seat. That's really what I remember is walking up and down the ramps and are we there? And then you get in and the field is basically concrete. The team is terrible. The uniforms are ugly. in the mid to late 80s before they got sort of a little bit of the brighter red back. But that was my experience. I didn't know any better. My dad was a huge Yankee fan. And so, we didn't really follow the same path from that perspective. So it's interesting to hear some of the other stories. But, we would go 4 or 5 games a year at the vet. And, that was what you did. You got used to it. It looked a little something like this poster behind me with, bright colors that were sort of just, that was the identity, and enough of it stuck that, times change. I would say I became a teenager in Baltimore right up the road, got a really nice stadium. That's when I started visiting places, went to Wrigley for the first time in 94. And, you really see some of the other stuff that's out there. And I think that I probably appreciated it more because I was comparing it to what I'd grown up with.
I always thought it was interesting that I'm sure it's Eddie that's choosing it. When Pearl Jam chooses to tour baseball stadiums, they don't even tour the new ones. They still just go to the classics. They go to Wrigley Field, they go to Fenway Park, and they don't really have a connection to Boston like they do to Wrigley. It's the stadium that brings them. I think it's the history of that stadium, playing that stadium, where 1912, they had games on the field. So I think that's the draw. And of course they play Seattle just because it's the home park.
It's there. Yeah.
Do we think Theo Epstein had a lot to do with sort of the Boston connection? Because I think some of the first PJ experiences were that Peter Gammons, the Hot Stove Cool Music, they played it maybe 2004 or 5. Theo had a band that played there at that time, and I know he sort of got close to Eddie. And I suspect that Eddie, was a huge baseball fan and understood, the significance of Fenway. And obviously the Red Sox at that point were getting interesting. And I suspect that they had a friendship that probably led to Eddie being at Fenway more often. And so probably developed some kind of, affinity for the area, for that particular venue. And obviously now Fenway is deeply ingrained in PJ lore.
And I want to say hi. He's being shy in the shadows, but a really great, incredible baseball mind, and been a very good friend to me. And he's also a huge music intellect and player as well. But there's a local hero you might know from his writings, Mr. Peter Gammons. He's here tonight, gracing us with his presence. Hey, Pete! We love you, Peter. Get one more round for Mr. Peter Gammons. That's a legend.
Just like a 30-song set list, the game thrives on its unpredictability. Every time you set foot in one of Major League Baseball's many cathedrals, it's almost a guarantee that you'll see something that you've never seen before. Your defensive-minded bench player who hits at a 172 clip, hitting a walk-off home run, is just as much of a surprise as the rarely played Bugs being featured in an encore. These are the moments where something unusual can become extraordinary. The gripe against baseball may be that it's too long or there's too much in action, but a good story doesn't conclude by chapter 2. It takes 9 innings, or in some cases, 1 or 2 encores in order to be rewarded by the payoff. That's a symmetry that is almost exclusive to these two entertainment spectacles. If you want to see end-to-end action in sports, you may be a better fit for a football or basketball game. If you want to see an artist drill through their songs live without sharing any anecdotes or origins about songs you're hearing, you may enjoy yourself more at maybe a Metallica concert. It's like theater with multiple acts and plot points. It keeps you invested so that decades later, the stories are worth reliving again. Joining us now is someone who has told his fair share of stories across 6 decades of covering baseball. He helped found the Hot Stove Cool Music Benefit Concert Series and compilation that Eddie and Pearl Jam have contributed to over the years. Here's our interview with accomplished baseball writer and skilled guitarist, Peter Gammons. Peter, thank you so much for coming on. You are obviously, as far as baseball goes, have been a part of the game for so long. And as far as music goes too, a lot of people know you and can connect you to music as well. So it's a really good connection that we have you on for this episode here.
Well, it's great fun anyway. Absolutely.
Hey, you can shred with the best of them, right?
Well, I don't know about that, but I'll let Bernie Williams take care of that for me.
Well, I want to start because you put together something back in 2004, I believe, Hot Stove Cool Music. And that's something that has been a project that you've worked on and a benefit that you've put together some shows for. And coming off of that, since you've kind of created basically a soundtrack for baseball, what do you think are some of the elements that are needed when you're coming up with the soundtrack for baseball?
Well, I mean, you got to have some baseball people. I mean, it was fun for the very beginning. I mean, the whole idea was concert baseball and rock and roll, and then in 2004, Theo Epstein and his twin brother got me to join their foundation to be named later, and we pooled together Hot Stove Cool Music and Foundation to be named later, and it's actually coming up this April, just about 3 weeks. It'll be the 25th year of doing it. And we've done it in Boston, we've done it in Chicago, we've done it in Florida, but we've had a lot of fun with it. We've had a lot of really great people play with us, and including Eddie 3 times, I think it is 4 times, and it's been a lot of fun. I mean, for people to play and so forth, and we've had a lot of really great people play with us. I mean, I think my good friends, when they were still together from Little Feat, after I had an aneurysm in 2006, they came and played a full concert for me in 2007, and I mean, Derek Trucks has played, and Susan Tedeschi have played a lot with us, so it's been a lot of fun over the years, and probably one of my greatest, most enjoyable nights was that Bernie Williams and I got to play with Buddy Guy in Chicago, and that was something. At the end of it, we did about, I don't remember, 6 songs, and I mean, Buddy Guy pointing to me to do a couple of solos was really that's probably the low point of his entire career. But Bernie walked across the stage, gave me a hug, and said, "Peter, this is the greatest thing I've ever done." The guy's won four World Series rings. He's won 2 batting titles, 3 Gold Gloves. I believe he's won 3 Grammys. However, I mean, Buddy Guy's pretty cool to play with, though. Something I'll never forget.
I would take that over an award any day, but I mean, I will never.
I'm wearing this club sweatshirt here, so
Very cool. How did you end up getting Pearl Jam and Eddie involved with the project?
Well, actually, it was sort of interesting. One year, I was writing my pre-spring training column for ESPN.com, and I used the lyric from "Thumbing My Way Back Home," which was "No matter how cold the winter, there's a springtime ahead."
Sure,
that was the lead to my George Webb, who's since been a great friend. George, basically their road manager. He got in touch with me, and that's how it all started. Really, it's one of my joys when I get to go to baseball games with George. So I like to try to make life as a Pittsburgh Pirates fan be a little bit easier for him.
Yeah, well, that comes with the
this
territory.
will be his year. It's going to be a good year for him.
I root for the small town teams. I hope that teams like the Pirates and the Athletics, I would like to see them do good at some point for the fans, especially for the fans, because you know that they're hungry for it.
Absolutely. I mean, actually, the A's will be playing in Sacramento this year.
Sure.
It's a tiny ballpark, but every game's going to be sold out.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Tampa Bay Rays are going to be playing in the Yankee spring training field.
Sure.
Might be the best clubhouse in baseball. You can't believe what the Yankees have done for the Rays. Wow. But at the same time, with the ticket prices, they may make more money off ticket sales this year in a minor league park than they did last year in whatever that they call that dome in St. Petersburg.
The Juice Dome. It wasn't a good year for. I made this joke a couple times. It wasn't a good year for Juice stadiums because Houston changed their name from Minute Maid Park to Daikin Park, and then the Tropicana Field. What happened with that with the Hurricanes? So it was not a good year for Juice stadiums.
No, not at all.
When talking to Eddie, what kind of fan do you sense from him? What kind of baseball fan is he?
Oh, he's a tremendous fan. I mean, he used to go to Cubs fantasy camps. I mean, and they were, one of his favorite stories was when he met a guy named Carmen Fanzone, who actually started with the Red Sox, ended up with the Cubs, and he met him. And Carmen Fanzone, in his spare time, was a trumpeter who played with Don Ho in Hawaii. And as it turned out, Eddie was somewhere. He was playing with a band in Arizona when they were at this camp, and he found out that he had played with his father, with Eddie's father, and
Wow.
came up with some music so he could hear his father. It's a great story, but Eddie's passionate about everything. I really believe that. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, I love writing in music. I mean, I saw Bob Dylan in Greenwich Village in 1962. It's things like that. But it's the writing in Pearl Jam is so good. That's one of the things that, along with the music, that has attracted me so much. Plus, there's so much fun and there's such great people. So it's interesting. I mean, he once asked me. I think we were at Theo Epstein's box in Chicago, and he asked me, why is Wish List your favorite song? Or your favorite song? I said, Eddie, because it's you. It's all that positivity in that song. I mean,
Sure.
I wish I were the pedal break that one depended on. I mean, that's one of the greatest. It's one of my favorite lines in rock and roll. Out in Little Feat's Rock and Roll Doctor has got some great lines in it too. So those are my two favorite songs for lyrics of all time.
One of the great things when they play that song live, when he does like the 15 million, he does 15,000 hands up raised, and everybody puts their hands up raised, and
Yes.
it really feels like you're in the moment with that song. It's such a cool song, and something that I told you when we spoke yesterday is that if we're in another universe with Pearl Jam here, and some of their songs were considered massive radio hits, which this one had some radio play, but this one would still be playing on radio today had they have made the decision to continue paying attention to that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of songs. I mean, I could listen to a live like 20 times in a row
Sure.
and never be tired of it. So, I mean, and the same thing actually with thumbing my way back home. I always thought that was just the thought that goes into all the lines in that song. It just really, I thought that was. I know it was not. I don't think it got a lot of airplay at different times, but
No, it was not a radio single.
it doesn't matter. I mean,
Right.
that's.
I mean, some of their best songs only the Pearl Jam people know. And I mean, you watch the Michael Jordan documentary, right? The 30 for
Mhm.
30. And at the end, they played Present Tense. And then, Present Tense to Pearl Jam fans, that's like considered to be a top song for, the hardcore people that go and follow them around. But, for people that kind of dropped off during No Code that heard that song during the Jordan documentary, I mean, the next day it was by far and away the number one song off Apple Music, and people were starting to pay attention to it again. And all of us here are like, yeah, you're not telling us anything that we don't know. Of course, this is an amazing song. There's so many in their catalog that you can say that about. And I think that's the beauty of it too, that if you're in and kind of in the mix and know about it, then you're going to be rewarded by that.
Well, as one who's had the great experience of watching concerts up on the stage, George Webb Yeah, and lets me come up there with him, and at times just had seats on the stage to be able to look out at the crowd and watch. All they do is play two notes, and all of a sudden the crowd is singing along. It just amazes me. I mean, they've memorized so many. It just seems like you've got years and years of all this great music, and people still are so attached to the lyrics. I think that's fairly unusual. I don't think that the writing that well, there's a lot of great writing, but there's such an attachment for their fans to their writing and their music. It's it's something. I mean, it's there's a sing along aspect for a great hardcore rock and roll band that's really unusual and takes a life, but it also really speaks to the lyrics and the thought that's gone into the writing and in a lot of ways the soul that goes into it. There's such a feeling and such a soul to what they do. And my feeling always is everything they do really matters.
Yes.
They really care. It's not just another night. I mean, every show, see back-to-back shows, you see the same intensity. And I remember back the first time I went to see them, 2003 in Mansfield, Massachusetts.
Oh
And
yeah. Okay. You were you at all three shows or were you at just one of them?
no, but I was at all three. But the thing was, if you remember, they had to cut the town cut
Yes.
short, so they did an extra show
Mm-hmm.
because people had not gotten all that they supposedly paid for. I mean, that will be Theo Epstein was there too, so we were just blown away by the fact that their responsibility to their audience was astounding to me. I mean, it really was. And that thought. I mean, you blame it on the town, but no. They could blame the town, but they ended up, still showing up and doing it all for their audience. And it was a great introduction and beginning, and those were really great nights there.
Oh, I mean,
Needless,
they're still talked about to this day. I mean, they're special for sure.
Mhm.
And I believe the story goes is that he took it upon himself, and really he meaning everybody in the band, not just Ed, took it upon themselves to invite those who live locally to the show and gave them tickets to, I think it was like the third night, to make sure like, hey, since you're hearing it, like you can be a part of this if you wanted to come to this. I believe that's what happened.
Yes, it did, and it was tremendous. I'll tell you another time that was really great was when closing out the building in Philadelphia
Oh
during the
yes.
World Series.
Mm-hmm.
That was tremendous. That was a tremendous night too.
Imagine being a Philadelphia fan, and I've talked to Philadelphia fans before. It was game three. I believe that the Phillies lost that game to the Yankees, but imagine like right across the street, the World Series is going on. This is at the time where like checking phones is like starting to kind of happen here, but still like cell service inside arenas. And I'm sure inside that arena was probably not at its best, but it just kind of a crazy time for Philadelphia, and what a venue to have them close down to. Unbelievable moment. So Pearl Jam playing at Fenway Park, they started playing there in 2016. I've been to five of the six shows, and every time I go, it feels exactly how it's supposed to feel for a baseball game. Like you're walking into a cathedral, like you're witnessing some sort of history and sacred grounds that you're on. When they announced that they were going to Fenway, I mean, I'm sure, not every single artist gets to play a stadium like that, but what did that mean to you and how excited were you about that? Because I know that in the first show in 2016, you were actually involved.
Well, I mean, Fenway can be when they first started having concerts there when this ownership took over in 2002. the sound systems were not very good.
Mm.
And Sam Kennedy took over and installed a really good sound system. But this last year, this last September, what really pleased me is that I was down just outside the stage before the show, and there were guys that worked there at Fenway Park for years, and they were all coming up. They're the nicest. They are the best band that they go around. They go and thank all these gentlemen that have been working there, and they go around. You just can't imagine what it means. I mean, the night before a Aerosmith Jay Giles combination concert in Fenway, there was a little bit of a fight between two lead singers.
Oh,
and
no.
oh yeah, it was not so good. And you know, these people don't get treated like that very often. And that was, I mean, I went and told them, these guys work there. You're their favorite band because of the way you treat people. And that does say a lot about, now they love it. And Fenway I think it's a great venue. Of course, we've also been lucky. We've had great weather for their concerts.
Yes.
We haven't had the rainouts and the
Right.
some of the problems.
It's been a little hot some of those nights, but tolerable hot, I think.
Yes. But I think that over the last probably 10, 15 years, it's Pearl Jam and it's James Taylor. Because it's James Taylor's home. His family built the ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing that 42,000 people sing from you know, to the turnpike from Stockbridge to Boston. 42,000 people sing that line. But so Boston really is a music town. I've always thought it's a baseball and rock and roll town, although the $6.1 billion for the Celtics may change that.
I want to go back to storytelling in baseball and how it kind of correlates to music, because we kind of touched up on that a little bit. But do you think that there are parallels between how stories of a baseball game, or even outside the game too, of just storylines, going into a series, going into a playoff series, how those kind of stories kind of match up with the same kind of storytelling that you can tell through music?
I think so. I mean, it depends on the people, but I think that when you go into baseball's certain series, I thought this last year in the World Series, because of the nature of the Dodgers and how spectacular they are in so many ways. I mean, the first three hitters in your lineup are surefire Hall of Famers, and they're also incredible people. With Shohei and Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts.
Sure.
There's a little bit. It's almost like a song that could follow each one of those guys. It's really funny. I was talking this spring with people, and Dave Roberts was saying, with each guy, how different they are, and yet how alike they are. Those three guys are almost like a super group. I mean, they're all incredible players. They're great people. I mean, like Dave Robertson, Mookie Betts, every player on the team knows that he would play every position, bat anywhere in the order, do anything to win a game. And he's like, every young player looks at him and just goes, this guy would, all he wants to do, very simple. Do anything in his power to win, and of course Shohei is such an incredible talent, and almost a legendary figure. It's almost like you've got Eddie or McCartney or somebody like that. I mean, he's bigger than the game in some ways, but that's good. I mean, they just, when they opened the season this year, they broke every record for selling memorabilia and so on. They had a 12-day fest, which brought in some ridiculous amount of money. Wow. That's great for baseball. I mean, anybody who's worried about, why are they bringing in? it's great that it's worldwide. It's great that Japan is a great baseball country, and so is Korea. And actually, a friend of mine with the Dodgers who was out spent some time right before that trip in Taiwan. Said they're really developing it there. It's great that they're doing that, and I just hope that the crackdown on Venezuelans coming to this country isn't going to tremendously affect baseball. I talked to a couple of Major League Baseball people who are really afraid that all of a sudden there's a lot of great Venezuelan players and a lot of tremendous young players, not just Acuna, that they're worried about somehow they're not going to be able to get back into the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that changes. Obviously, things are grim right now, but I mean, like, across the board change, not just getting baseball players, but everybody. So yeah, I mean, in full support of that. But it's yeah, I can't agree with more. It's just been yeah, it's been something. But to kind of go back to baseball here, do you have like a bold prediction for the year? Just one last little thing here. Bold prediction for the baseball year. Like, what can we be excited for? What do you think will happen that will surprise people?
Um, well, I think what we may see, I think we're going to see. I mean, the Dodgers are still going to be great, and
Sure.
they've done so much to make themselves great. But one of the terrific things I love that Mike Hazen in Arizona just goes, I don't want to hear about it's terrible what the Dodgers did. It's great. It's great for the game. I mean, Yankees and Dodgers World Series put a lot of money in the pockets of the owners in Miami and Tampa and places like that. But it's also brings people to watch it when you've got Aaron Judge and you've got the three Dodgers and those pitchers. I mean, Yamamoto in that opening game in Japan against the Cubs looked like he could easily win the Cy Young Award, and that'd be a lot of fun. But I think you're going to see a revival. I think Kansas City is going to be much, much better. I mean, Bobby Witt is. I had a great hour and a half lunch with Bobby Witt and George Brett in spring training, and it's two generations of great players. Kansas City's a great baseball town. I mean, it's, and we need the middle American teams, the smaller markets, to be really. I think Detroit is going to be a really surprising team. I think, and I say this with my heart because I want them to. I would so much love to see them in the World Series. I don't know if they're going to get there, but I do think that Seattle is going to be much better. They're going to finally keep their pitchers healthy and score some runs. And I mean, I think Seattle is a great baseball town, and if they ever could get to a World Series there, it would be. I think it would be a great series because that ballpark is great, and I think they're going to be a big surprise. And I'm still kind of a believer that if I were to say who's going to win the World Series, I'd still say Philadelphia.
Really?
I said
that hurts.
year.
You see what's back there.
There's something special about them. Bryce Harper and all those. It's a lot of fun. But I just want teams to be there right down to the end. I mean, I want to see. I'd love to see the Cubs come back.
Sure.
Especially since ownership is like threatening all their front office if they don't win, which is, I don't know. That's a little tough. And I think the Mets are going to be a lot better. I think the whole East is going to be really good in the National League. I think the East in the American League, I think Boston's going to be very good by the time it's over. So that will be a lot of fun, and it'd be kind of fun to have a World Series with either Boston or Seattle or a team like that against Philadelphia, and the kind of year that we all hope. I'd love to see. I think my prediction is Bobby Witt is the MVP in the American League.
It's a good prediction. I agree with that. And Juan Soto for the National League, right?
Could be, yes, or it could be Harper.
Harper,
but,
Ohtani,
it could be a lot of people.
Dodgers.
Mookie Betts, if if he Mookie will play all 9 positions one game, and go see what happens from that. First one since whoever it was back with the Twins back in the '60s.
Thank you so much for joining today. I mean, a wealth of baseball knowledge, a wealth of music
Well,
knowledge.
it is fun. Just my little show and tell.
Sure.
This
Yeah,
is
please do.
This is a bottle of beer that it says All-Star Hall of Fame Ale. This me there beneath, but Eddie right there. So we share a Hall of Fame ale bottle.
Very cool. Very cool. And as we all know, once Eddie takes a bottle, he drinks it down, he passes it around. So thank you so much for joining us. And hey, have a great baseball season. Can't wait to
Thank you very
see
much. It's
what
great.
happens. Yep.
Okay.
Take care.
All right.
Once again, a huge thank you to Peter. That was terrific, and always love hearing from him. So hopefully you guys really got to enjoy that as much as I did. All right, now let's go back to our panel and continue the conversation about storytelling in baseball and how it compares to storytelling in music.
Really, any given time, something truly unique could happen. Is this the game that goes 46 innings? Is this the game where there's 2 perfect games going until the 9th? You know, like Pearl Jam show, is this where Jack Iron's kid walks out and OTOTOs us? It's just crazy.
Well, that's actually an interesting parallel because in theory, in the 3rd or 4th inning, you're not going to have a walk-off. You're not going to have the big matchup with the big closer or something like that. And it builds up to the crescendo where, sure, interesting things can happen early, but they're built to happen late. And in a show, you got your opener, you got a few songs sort of going, and you know that when you hear the beginning of Porch, you're like, all right, the rest of the show, all bets are off. Now the weird stuff can happen.
Pearl Jam, the way they do their set lists and do their shows, but I mean, obviously album tours sometimes are a little bit different, but in general, throughout their history, is more like baseball, whereas most fans are more like basketball or football, where you have a clock, essentially. You've got a clock because you know they're going to play the same set every night. Look, I love the Foo Fighters, but I saw the Foo Fighters on their first show of the tour at Fenway Park this year, and I talked to my buddy about it. And the next night, not only did they do the exact same set, they had the same little stories and same little jokes and same little intros in between every song. Like it's a performance from top to bottom, and it's fine. I had a really good time. But that's basketball. That's watching the clock. Baseball is very unique in sports in that there is no clock. Well, they added a stupid clock recently, but in general, there is no clock.
Yeah.
You know, the game can go as long as the game goes, and each game is different. It's unique. It tells a story. Where the PJ set lists are kind of the same way. You don't know what you're going to get when you're going in. You don't know if is this going to be close to the end? Is this close to the beginning? Are they going to play 32 songs? They're going to play 24 songs. You don't know. So I just feel like it's more like baseball than a lot of other bands.
I think that's absolutely true. And I picked up on that later doing a lot of podcasts here in Tennessee. We do a Bonnaroo podcast, which when I started doing it, I was like, how are we going to do this every single week? And after we talked about it and I kind of rethought about, oh yeah, I mean, talking about something that people are so passionate about, like Pearl Jam or a festival, is like looking at a set list. It's like looking at a box score. It's like looking at the minutia of it all that most people aren't paying attention to that much, but it means a lot. Like 2 of 4 for the night with 3 RBIs. I mean, I can't, looking at all those things. It's the same to me as going through, where did they open? Where did they close? Where was the set break? I feel like that's a very, very, it correlates together very, very well between what Pearl Jam does on a nightly basis and what you see every single night in a baseball game played in a yard down the road, right? It doesn't even have to be a Major League Baseball game. I think those go together very well.
I often make the comment that I follow Live Footsteps like I follow Gamecast.
Yeah.
You can sit at home, pull it up on your phone, see the plays as they happen.
Yeah.
And at the end, there's a score. The interesting thing is that they can sort of forced it. In baseball, it might not be a walk-off. It might be a 10-3 game and some scrub pitches the ninth inning and the game's over. You know that when you're at a Pearl Jam concert, crescendo, encore, builds and builds and builds. And at the end, the whole place is going crazy. And, the only sort of parallel to that in baseball is when you get to a postseason game, it's going to end with either the closer or some pitcher of some note, getting the last out. And then there's the dog pile and there's the interview of the who's likely to be the MVP and the presentation of the trophy. Like, it's at that point it's scripted, but for 162 games in playoffs, it's not. It doesn't necessarily end in that same fantastic manner.
This is exactly where I wanted to jump in, just because this is the thing I spent the most time thinking about. And the only thing that I'll add to this conversation, because I think everybody else picked up on it very well, but the other element is I like the comparison of other bands and more stagnant set lists to other sports, in the sense that it feels like they're watching the clock. And in baseball, it's a different thing. It's also different in the sense that in most other sports I follow, especially sports I follow very closely, I think probably football is the best example of this. You're along for the ride as a fan base, or you're along for the ride as fans of a sport, and it's basically the same ride for everybody. You're basically there for every game. The arc of the season is pretty universal. The thing that I love about baseball, and the thing that makes it super comparable to Pearl Jam, is that we're celebrating opening day with this episode, and it's the celebration really, postseason's its own thing. It's a celebration really of this 162 game season. And the unique thing about it is everybody, one Cubs fan to another, one Mets fan to another, etc., like, you all have your own individual season within the team season, because there's games you'd watch and there's games you don't watch. And you might catch one of the more notable games. You might catch the game that nobody else remembers, but for some reason that means a lot to you as far as what this season was. And that kind of reminds me, in the Pearl Jam side of things, outside of, a little podcast that we're all familiar with that kind of has given us more of a prescribed order of things. Everybody has their own order of which Pearl Jam show they first listened to, which bootleg they first picked up. And everybody's Pearl Jam fandom is uniquely impacted by that. There were certain shows that were essential shows that for certain people were probably one of the first bootlegs they ever picked up, that for me took forever to get around to it. And I saw that in a completely different light. Other shows probably aren't that relevant, but for me they were, just because of when they took place. It's completely different for everybody. There's no two Pearl Jam timelines in terms of what people listen to first and afterwards. It's exactly the same. And it's the same with baseball. There's only so many people who could watch 162 games. And I think that's part of the beauty of it, is that you don't. As opposed to other sports where it's more easy to. That's kind of where the stories build, and that gets reflected on the Pearl Jam side of things as well.
Pearl Jam fans are more like Star Trek fans. We're just nerds.
It's a true story right there.
We're looking at live footsteps, and we're like tracking set lists, and we're like, that's baseball. I mean, yeah, some people are like that with basketball and football, but a lot more people are like that with baseball. You know
That's
what I
it.
mean?
This is so conducive to stat geekery on both ends. Like, we are able to track the set lists you've seen. This moment, this song played in this order and whatnot. Baseball, you're going to pull apart a box score in much the same way. Like, it's an interesting parallel. We
collect things, right? I collect going to see stadiums. The next thing I do is collect seeing the Cubs on the road. Or I've got a buddy that for a while there was trying to collect seeing the top pitchers in the game. So he would only go to games where certain teams were in town and try and guess the timing of the rotations and stuff. You can't do that with the Chili Peppers.
No, you can't.
And 16 songs, 4 years in a row.
I will mention another thing too. I think most of you know this, but my background, goes pretty long way with being in sports media, and I worked for ESPN for about like 10 years, and I did multiple assortment of jobs here and there. But one of the things that you do when you start off, it's like entry level, is you're cutting the highlights for the games every nightly broadcast. And I did that a lot. I got onto a highlight unit, which meant, the top highlight storytellers of each night got to take the best games. And, That was a big thing. I think somebody had mentioned the difference between the box score and looking at a set list. And I bring that approach to what I try and do with this podcast is that, what you see in the box score isn't necessarily what's going to be the story that's told in the game. The story is told through maybe something that isn't even relevant on a box score. Maybe the story is, and this is an extreme, but maybe the story is something like a Steve Bartman kind of situation where a fan gets involved. Maybe the story is that somebody like Albert Bell runs into a guy while he's trying to take his way into second. Like that's the kind of stuff. If you're looking at a set list and you look down, you're like, even flow, better man, daughter. Oh, you know what? I've seen this before. I don't want to listen to this. But then you go through it. If you do listen to it, you're like, whoa, before Better Man, Ed told this incredible story about, his history in San Diego or something like that. And that's what makes the difference. That's what connects the storytelling all together. You are not going to find out on a set list. Sure, if Dirty Frank or Undone or Bush Leaguer is on a set list, that is a story. And you can easily tell that story, but that's the same as the box score. If Juan Soto goes 4 for 4 with 2 home runs, that's the obvious story, but the obvious is the obvious. Finding the stories within what the stories are, forgetting about the what's, focusing on the hows and whys, that's what makes a story complete.
Okay, let's talk about number 29 and this new gets moments.
All right. Number 29 is a friend of mine named Jack McDowell. This is my tribute to him here. He was the first pitcher to win 20 games, and he gave me one of his caps that I wore all through the European tour and the American tour. It was kind of a good luck thing. I always had a good show with it, and he seemed to be playing well as long as we were playing well.
Have you heard that new EP he's got out?
Oh, yeah, it's great. There's a song called Trickle Down that I warm up to before we go on. He's pretty good. George Brett said that if he could sing as good as he pitched, maybe he'd buy some of his records, but I think George is just jealous. I think George ultimately would like a record of his own.
Hello, Jack McDowell here, old White Sox player, and a musician too. Pearl Jam fan, for sure. Eddie Vedder and I met in Chicago when I had started my MLB career with the White Sox, and he was just about to get Pearl Jam band going while living in Chicago. We met because my ex-wife and his ex-wife were friends in college, and it was very cool to see and hear his original music as I was beginning my music as well. For the first time, my band called The View, back when I was playing baseball. So we were both kind of musicians, and we really liked just doing music and having fun with all that. And it was great hearing the song Better Man, as that was one of his original, already recorded songs that he put into the Pearl Jam band to have one of the greatest songs. And while his living space, he was near the Chicago Cubs, so he was a Cubs fan. And after we met and hung out for a while and started hanging out, then he became one of our fans for the White Sox. And if you have seen some of the Pearl Jam first concerts, he was wearing one of the White Sox baseball hats I had given to him. That was kind of cool. And right when Pearl Jam started, I was a big promoter of their music to the Chicago radio stations. Even before the CDs and records had been made, I was promoting and giving that music to the places all in Chicago, so they would get it going and get it rolling, and that would just get everyone excited to when those CDs and records finally came out, and they got a lot of them bought and sold, and that's awesome. It was a great job. So it was a lot of fun.
There's an old adage that you'll hear from time to time that states, rock stars wish they were athletes, and athletes wish they were rock stars. It makes it easy for them to connect with one another, whether it's due to mutual respect or maybe even a little playful jealousy. Eddie over the years has made friends with players from all around the game, modern day stars as well as icons he grew up watching as a kid. From time to time, you'll get to hear him make mention of some of his ballplayer friends during shows. A few of them have been lucky enough to join the band on stage to be a part of the show. Let's take a listen to some of the memorable moments where baseball was front and center at a Pearl Jam show.
You know, Ernie Banks used to say, let's play two. I think we can say, let's play till two. Congratulations on the World Series. Shit's gonna go on. Saturday night is gonna be Halloween, the World Series next door. This place is gonna be blown up. Oh, I got this little chant I invented for Raul Ibanez. Raul. You can maybe do it high. Raul. Now, if I told you he's actually in the building, would you do it louder? Raul. There you go. I don't know why there's a big head of Sean Casey. He's an American baseball player. I don't understand why he's here, and his head is huge. You see how big that head is? The funny thing is, that is actual size head of that man. So, you know what he'd like though, if we say, we could get a chant going, hey Sean Casey, and then we'll send it to him, and then his head will get even bigger. Hey Sean Casey! Hey Sean Casey! Hey! The mayor! Hey Sean Casey! The mayor! Hey! The mayor! Just got news that the Cardinals won. You know what? Sorry, actually, they lost. But doesn't that make you feel better that you were here instead of sitting at home watching a stupid fucking game? There's a lot of friends here tonight. There's a guy on the Cardinals. I can be friends with somebody on the Cardinals. He's a pitcher. You know who you are. I don't want to get you in trouble in case you're not allowed to be here. I also want to say thanks to Albert Pujols. It's a long story, but he once fixed my ear. I had an ear infection and he fixed it. Dr. Al.
Take a bottle, take it down, pass it around. I said, yeah, take a bottle.
I forgot to tell you, I was going to tell you a little something. I didn't even tell the group. But I guess they're going to hear it now. This is the last time this band's ever going to tour from April to October. We're not going to tour anymore during April and October. Not because of the weather or anything, but just because the owner of the Cubs last night, he offered me a job working in the scoreboard, and I just can't turn that down. I need to. I mean, that's living the dream. Are you from Portland? But you're wearing a Yankees hat? I can't figure that shit out. Oh, there you go. Oh. Yeah, I know, because the baseball rivalry between the Yankees and the Portland, it's a crazy one, I know. I just can't remember the... was just in Shea Stadium a couple days ago. You definitely got rats there. I know you got rats in New York City. Did you play on the Mets? You look like you could play on the Mets. You're not Mookie Wilson, are you? All right. It's number 1, right? Who are you, number 1? What's on the back of your shirt? Oh, it is Mookie Wilson, ladies and gentlemen, Mookie Wilson. All incognito and shit. My favorite player was Ichiro. I think he played right over there last month. And there was a guy that used to play out right here, number 44, Mike Cameron. But then the other Seattle Mariner who made magic in this very space and the old kingdom. And he's such a huge fan of music and a really good drummer, you see. And, he likes our group okay. And it's Randy Johnson, that's what I'm talking about. His favorite band of all time was Soundgarden, is Soundgarden, will forever be Soundgarden. Randy would be excited to know that tonight in center field is not Mike Cameron, but Mr. Matt Cameron on the drum kit. One of our friends has already been on our team this tour, the multi-talented, multifaceted, multi-instrumentalist playing behind the drum kit right now, Mr. Josh Klinghoffer. He's like the Shohei Ohtani of rock and roll. We all wish he was in Los Angeles right now, but he's gonna get him next year. And he's become a good friend of mine, good friend of ours. And he's a team player and a hero all the way around. It's good to see he's still alive. Jason Grilly, everyone.
I know you guys are loud because the night we had, the several nights we had here in Pittsburgh, I've never, ever been a part of anything like that in attendance or playing for people that are so passionate about their sports and about their Pittsburgh Pirates. And I'll tell you what, we wear our hearts on our sleeve here, don't we? I love this city. I love you guys. I will pitch my balls off for you. We'll play our hearts out for you. Because next year, it's our fucking year. Do it! Do it!
It was the All-Star break, so there wasn't a game here. There was no way I could get in. There was no way to buy a ticket. There was no, well, except unless you climbed a fence. So, climbed a fence. There was a bunch of people in there. I hid behind a few boxes and crates, waited till they walked by, ran through some corridors, up some stairs, and then came out right over there and took these pictures because I couldn't believe I was at Fenway Park. I had to get in to fucking Fenway Park. I had to. It was such a miracle, such a fucking miracle, that I have a strong belief in God. His name's David Ortiz, and he's number 34. Hey, could I get a, I'm gonna change it. Can I get a uke up here? Can I get a, where you gotta yell.
Red Sox Nation, Boston, Massachusetts. It's great to be back here tonight with one of the greatest bands of all time.
Well, you all know, I always say it's a beautiful day, let's play two. So I'm so happy to see all of you here at my house. Like you, I love this place. This is the most beautiful place in my life. I love it. I could stay here, sleep here. Now, Eddie knows this place real well. He came here when he was 5 years old. This is his glove that he bought when he was 5 years old. And I'm keeping it and taking it with me. I'm taking it with me because I want to keep it. But I appreciate all of you coming here to my house tonight and staying and spending some time. Thank you.
All of us being huge baseball fans here, we've all seen a ballpark show, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
I have not. Yeah, I have not seen it. I've not been to a ballpark.
Not
show.
been to a ballpark.
Not for
Okay.
Pearl Jam, no. But
Okay. I think, especially 2013, obviously it was kind of the first of its kind. They had played PNC when opening up for the Stones, and then the Oakland Coliseum also opening up for the Stones. So it doesn't really count because they're not their shows, and it wasn't through an era where ballparks were the pinnacle of Pearl Jam performances. And in 2013, I just kind of remember just the fact that they were playing Wrigley felt massive because at the time, like, I'm not paying attention to what's going on in Chicago. I don't know what bands are going in and playing Wrigley Field, but like I do know that there weren't a whole lot of shows at the time at like Yankee Stadium or Citi Field. Like every now and again, you'd get a Billy Joel close down Shea Stadium or something like that, or Paul McCartney would go and play, but it wasn't anything unless it was so specific, like somebody massive like that, like an Elton John playing a Dodger Stadium kind of big, that these things would happen. And now it's so commonplace now that, but it kind of seemed like a pipe stream that it would happen, but it felt like all of the stars seemingly were meant to align, from way back in the beginning, that we knew that there was a connection with baseball. So for those of you who were at Wrigley 2013, I think that one is obviously the one where everything truly begins and where his story and his connection becomes, public within the fan base. Again, going back to Aaron with the Cubs ties here, when you found out that they were playing Wrigley, was that something that you had always dreamed of?
I don't think I'd ever thought about it. Like, especially like PJ20 happens. And a couple of you have heard me say this story, like a couple of you guys that are newer, we haven't caught this. Like, I spent my first wedding anniversary at PJ20. So there's just a lot of things going on in my life at the time. It was like, okay, like I'd missed the 2006 tour. I'd only gone to one of the Chicago 2009 shows. And then PJ20 happened. So for me, like, I was like, okay, I'm back in my Pearl Jam swing. You're just going to go to a show. And it's like, oh my God, they're playing Wrigley. This is like, what a cool Venn diagram overlap. Cubs and me and this. And it was so much more than I expected. And I'm not talking about the weather, it got to be just the day of. It was miserably hot, but like standing outside on that construction riddled sidewalk in a merch line was, you go back to the box score, right? On the surface level, it was just complete misery. But I'm like, we're standing outside Wrigley Field and we're going to see
And I
Pearl
don't think
Jam tonight. It didn't even make sense to me until it actually, like, when we got inside and they came on the stage, it was like, oh, okay, it's real.
I think Eddie seemingly planned that show, up for everything from, the guests that arrived to the songs that were played to even the rain delay in the middle, just so he can say, let's play till 2. I think he purposefully did that.
Deal with the devil.
Mm-hmm. But like the thing that obviously the rain delay is a story within itself, and we don't have to exhaust on the rain delay here. But the thing I'll always take away from it is that, it's Ernie Banks coming on the stage while Ed at the time playing the Cubs anthem all the way. And, it wouldn't be till 3 years later that they'll see the World Series finally in Chicago. And it's kind of like, if you look at those 3 ballpark shows, the 2013 show is kind of the beginning of the Cubs, starting to acquire some players and starting to develop guys like Chris Bryant and starting to get Baez involved. And then 2016 is like, okay, we have a team. We feel really good about it this year. Could this be our year? This really feels like it could. And then 2018, when they come back, is, yeah, that really happened. We're finally back to celebrate it with everybody. So it's a talk about all the storytelling, but that in and of itself is just, within 3 chapters there, telling the story about, the last decade of being a Cubs fan, and seeing Ernie Banks on stage with him and hearing the story about how Ernie asked him to write an anthem for the Cubs. So, he went back home and wrote one immediately. And then the aftermath of the story, I believe, is that was kind of one of the last times that he had, visited Wrigley Field. That after that, he ran into some bad health and he passed away, I want to say like a year and a half later.
That was one of
that, yeah.
That was one of his very last public appearances, period.
Well,
yeah,
it was
going
one of his
back.
last public in terms of like broad, made the news, people knew about it, but Ernie was a man about town.
Okay.
He lived out in Naperville. In fact, I'm at almost 19 years working for Bank of America. In 2007, I grand opened our Naperville, the first one we had in Naperville. And I deal with acid reflux disease. That's when I first had it flare up and got it. And I was actually hospitalized for 2 days when we had our official grand opening and missed meeting Ernie Banks. He sat at my desk signing autographs that day because at the time, along with the Yankees, the Red Sox, a couple others, we had 6 MLB teams that we were a primary sponsor with. So we had the Major League Baseball credit card and all that. And so somehow through the MLB connection, we had Ernie Banks as our guest of honor. And he was a regular at a restaurant that I worked at, came to the bar all the time. Somehow, between that being my part-time job and scheduling and me being sick at the hospital and all that stuff, I never met the man. We ran around the same town for 3 years together. And I had people tell me, we think it's like a Superman and Clark Kent thing with you two. It's hilarious. So the first time that we were within a block of each other was Wrigley 2013. I was like, oh, he does actually exist. And so, he was just kind of living life. People would bump into him, but he was the sweetest man. Every story, his autograph is completely worthless because he'd sign anything for anyone. And that's amazing. I'm all for that. And it's not quite like Minneapolis and Prince. That's another level. But when he passed, this was a sad, sad town.
Singer Eddie Vedder.
All right, let's sing it for Harry. A 1, a 2, a 3. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and crack. I don't care if I ever get back, 'cause it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a game. For it's 1, 2,
Three strikes you're out at the old ball game. So long, everybody.
C'è la luna menzumata, mamma mia dare. Figlia mia cosa dare, mamma mia pensaccia tu. Se te piglia lo pesciaiolo, isso va, isso viene, se lo pesce a manatena. Se ci ingappa la fantasia dei pescioli a vecchiuzza mia, la riola, pesce fritto e baccalà, uè compa, no calamara c'ha già catà. Second stanza.
There's a reason why concerts and games are played in front of thousands of people. These passions are not best shared alone, but best celebrated with the company that we keep. The truly unique thing about fandoms is that there's a shared language between us that we can all comprehend. This is what sets the fanatic and the mild connoisseur apart. Let's try an exercise here. I'm going to mention some key phrases and terms that any Pearl Jam fan should be able to understand the meaning behind without thinking twice. Moline, Fox Theater, Self-Pollution Radio, Stupid Mop, OTOTO. Now I'll do the same for baseball. The Great Bambino, Joe Carter, the Black Sox Scandal, Moneyball, Bill Buckner. For those of you that know, no further explanation is needed, and you can probably tell a pretty good story about any of these topics. It's how these conversations never end until you're finally kicked out of the bar. We've had some great discussions interconnecting the two fandoms here, so for one more time, let's send it over to our panel to share some more stories.
I think a lot of us will often think, some of us have met these guys, but like I go, if you're up in Seattle and you bump into Ed on the beach, like, what do you talk about? I'd ask him which baseball stadiums he's been to. Because I think back, like, okay, so they played First Ave. Did he get to go to the fucking Metrodome? Like, did he take the time?
For him, going to unique baseball games, I think, has become an art of his.
Yeah. But I wonder how much of that did he do earlier on? And because we got so many new stadiums so quickly in the 90s and early 2000s, did he miss any? I think that would be a fun conversation.
Did they plan the tours based on, where the stadiums might have been? In those days, they probably could have. And Eddie in particular probably wanted to.
I think at the time, Eddie had a really tough time being seen in public. Especially after like 94, 95 with the situation that kind of developed into what Lucan was. Yeah. I don't think he wanted to be seen in public a whole lot, but now, I mean, he was seen at a Twins game when they were in St. Paul a couple of years ago. He was obviously seen at Pearl Jam Day at Wrigley. And I think that all kind of goes back to, I was going to mention this before, we were talking a little bit about Fenway, but that Fenway story about how when they were playing a show at the Axis in 1991 and they were on the All-Star break, he tells it every single time that they play there about how he snuck in and took the Polaroids of the stadium just to say that he was there. I mean, that's anybody. That's all of us right there. That shows how much he loves it.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was at the Worcester 2013 show when he brought up one of the many times he said, go into Fenway and sneaking a peek, it was like seeing your friend's older sister naked. I was just like, oh, there it is. It is beautiful. And I think Mike was saying that earlier too about the just first walking up the ramp and seeing the colors and how vibrant it is. I imagine that's what he felt at that moment too.
I ran into Eddie. I hung out with Eddie in 2001, and we talked about baseball.
Nice. Nice.
So, yeah, I mean, he talked about the Cubs. We talked about the Padres. At the end of the night, and this is something I will never forget. For the light, and he was a little bit gun shy at that point, still, or like camera shy. Like when I met him, we were both outside having a cigarette, and I go, "Hey man, I'm a big fan. Do you mind if we take a picture?" He's like, "Sure, man. Just don't advertise that I'm here." I'm like, "Sure, no problem." Anyway, after the show, we hang out and through the closed bar, we're shooting pool. We talk baseball. Hit my brother, his brother, his mother was there. Jill was there, his new girlfriend. And I remember at the end of the night, he goes to my brother and I, he goes, "Hey, you guys, I'm not doing an Eddie impression. I'm just giving a kind of a taste. If you guys aren't doing anything tomorrow, you can come out to Blacks with us. We're going to go surf, me and Klesko." And yeah,
Ryan
and I was
Klesko.
Like, yes, Ryan Klesko, who was a Padres first baseman.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I really want to say yes, but we don't surf, man. I grew up in New York. I mean, we don't surf. So I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. And he goes, "You know what? I actually just appreciate you not being a poser and coming out and just glamming on." So he goes, "Thanks so much." It just gives us both a hug. And then that was the end of the night. But to the point is, we talk baseball, and the next day he's hanging out with a baseball player that I'm sure he didn't know through personal connections. I'm sure he knew him because he's a baseball player. He went to the game. He met him. They hung out. They had a good time. They went surfing together.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Tommy and Ned, Fenway shows, obviously the Boston connection is there. I don't know how many of those that you guys were at, but you guys were definitely at the shows that I was at. So is there any similar comparison to what Aaron was talking about with Wrigley, seeing them at a similar ballpark cathedral?
I mean, very much so. Tom can probably put a better date on it than me, but like concerts at Fenway Park, period, were not a thing for most of our life. Like this is not something that we would have dreamed of as kids because it just wasn't a thing that existed. I've been to 5 of the 6 shows there. I did not go. It actually ties together. I didn't go to night 2 in 2018 because I flew down to Atlanta to see the Red Sox play the Braves for that whole series. But I don't know. It still blows me away that in hindsight that I'm able to go see this band play at that venue. It's my very favorite place on earth. Like it's just never something I ever would have dreamed of. It ties into baseball in a lot of ways. He'll tell many stories, not quite as strongly as with the Chicago connection, but he has a lot of personal relationships with the Fenway staff that he's mentioned many times over. It's become a staple of their concert schedule in general when they actually play. There are a handful of fairly big artists that will gravitate towards Fenway Park. They're pretty restrictive, I guess, with who they bring there. And they've become one of the I don't think it's an exaggeration to say one of the all-time live staples at that venue. The bulk of the shows that they've played there have been memorable in one way or another. Again, not to the same level as Wrigley Field, but there are nooks and crannies of each show that can be pulled apart and brought into the greater conversation of their history, I guess. But I'll go see them extensively on tours, but like last year was great because I got to finish at home. I couldn't have been any happier about that. Went all corners of the country other than that, but we got to wrap up there, and that was kind of sweet.
Seeing them at Fenway Park, I went to the second show in 16 and the second show in 18, and then both in 24. I remember going into the first show I went in 16. I was kind of worried about the sounds because they're kind of like building a stage from the ground up.
Yeah.
Because this baseball season is still going on, and the sound was great, and I was so impressed. And it was when they were playing those like bananas, like 32 song shows, maybe a few too many covers, but and then in 18 we got like the Dirty Frank fake out. That was that was okay. I mean,
hold on. So about that, I'm at now Truist Park, then SunTrust during Fenway night 2. And over the course of this series, like we went down on Labor Day and I saw like 3 or 4 other shirts from the previous night's show. I'm like, that's interesting. But for the night game, there was a pretty good contingency, like 40, 50, like night 1 Pearl Jam shirts at the ballpark in Atlanta, which was sort of crazy. So we're sitting there. There's a guy watching the show on his phone 2 rows in front of me on Periscope.
I think he told me this. Yeah.
Piped up afterwards. He looks around at a few, he sees me because I'm wearing one of my shirts. He's like, they just kind of played Dirty Frank at Fenway Park. I'm like, what? They didn't really. Sort of crazy. That was worlds colliding right there. Like my ballpark neighbor was watching the show that we were sort of missing, I guess.
That's awesome that you find that in the wild in Atlanta while you're down there from Boston and they're playing in Boston.
Crazy.
That's awesome. This is a story of how a person related to baseball ruined my concert. Yield Walkie, 2014, the third show I saw on that tour. I get into the GA area with my buddy. We're probably like 4 people deep. You know, we didn't show up super early, but that's great for watching a show. He leaves and gets beers. He comes back. We drink the beers. I go and get the next round. I come back and he's like, hey, I'm talking to this guy. He's talking about baseball, blah, blah, blah. The guy is Theo Epstein. And he goes, oh, hey, blah, blah, blah. We're talking about baseball for a couple minutes. We got a photo. I'm like, yeah, let me get a photo with you, even though, like, you kind of fucked me in 2004. You know, you took away my 1918 chant that we'd had for my entire life. Every time I went to a Yankee Red Sox game, like, the Red Sox fans would chant, and then the Yankee fans would just chant 1918, and it would be over. We had the hammer to the nail. He took that away. He laughed a little bit. He's like, well, check this out. Tonight, I'm going to redeem myself because they're going to play Yield from beginning to end. And I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah. I go, you just ruined the show.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not good information. I don't want that. I don't want to know that.
You just ruined the show. And he goes, really? And my buddy goes, he fucked you again. I'm like, yeah, he did. But we watched the show. It was good. But it was Theo, and he was there with the guys in front of us, I should mention, were enormous people.
Because they were the Green Bay Packers front line,
it was
right?
The Green Bay Packers offensive line were in front of us.
And Mike, that all happened because it's baseball karma. It's because you're a Yankees fan. It's just baseball karma.
There you go.
Yeah, you know what? I'll take it for 27 world championships.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's part of why. I mean, I've had one interaction with Theo Epstein. It was much shorter, and it was much sweeter. I went to Game 2 of the 16 World Series in Cleveland. It was freezing, miserable rain. It was as Cleveland as it could possibly be. I got an SRO ticket in the outfield. I happened to find a group of Cubs fans having a blast. By the end of that game and the way that the series would go on, I thought it was going to be the only Cubs World Series game win in my life. But somewhere around the 7th or 8th, I just took a lap because trying to get some warmth going and go find something to drink. And I get behind home plate, and there's this dude walking towards me. And if you followed the Cubs closely enough, you knew that Theo had 2 phones. He had the phone. We all have a smartphone. Then he had a Razor flip phone that was his bat phone to Joe. And I see him walking towards me, and he's on the bat phone. They're about to do a major pitching change. And he sees me and my Cubs, and he goes, and I go, and that was it. He didn't fuck me.
That means Eddie must have been pretty close behind because he and Theo were attached at the hip.
Eddie was
whole
upstairs.
Entire series.
Yeah, Eddie was upstairs. Theo was going back up to the suites. This was down at home plate concourse.
Baseball has the unique quality of acting as a soundtrack to your life in a way that other sports don't, and the way that it can sit in the background. There's a reason why baseball radio is romanticized in a way that other sports, it's not really the same. That's a relationship that I've had with baseball. And one of the reasons why the Cubs were so important to me to a degree that other pro sports weren't was first couple of years of my life, I lived on Sheffield Avenue, 8 blocks down from Wrigley, right across from the Vic. And there's a more local neighborly connection there. And so when I became a Pearl Jam fan alongside the Cubs World Series run is kind of really how that time worked out. And that was also the beginning of high school for me. It just hit hard in a way that just made a lot of sense. So it's especially meaningful to me that we're doing this exercise this week for this baseball season and taking a break from our usual weekly show listens to celebrate the connection between this band and the sport, because it's always been completely interconnected for me. I mean, Let's Play 2 was a big part of that. The fact that my first Pearl Jam podcast appearance happened at Murphy's Bleachers is a big part of that. So I think the fact that non-baseball fans might be a little confused as to why we're taking a moment for this. But I think it makes a lot of sense when you think about all the thought that was put into an entire band documentary that was put into this sport. And it, of course, extends way beyond that. But I think that that's a very important cornerstone to this whole conversation is that documentary.
I keep thinking back to Eddie walking around Wrigley when they're in town to play the Metro really early on. Like that whole video sequence. Just ever since Randy said we're going to do this, like that's just been playing in my head nonstop.
And every time I'm in the neighborhood, whether it's for Cubs games or other concerts or anything, if I'm just down there for some reason and, I'm walking by Wrigley, I'm probably also walking by the Metro. And that's, what's the first band I'm thinking of? Pretty easy. Unlike many relationships between bands and sports where it has to be a little forced, this is just so natural to an extent that it goes without saying. It's just there. You look at Wrigley, you look at the Metro, I mean, they're right there.
Don't let anyone say that it's just a game. Don't let anyone tell you that you've seen enough shows. We keep coming back for every tour and every series because it fills our soul with hope. Hope that you'll finally hear the song you've been chasing. Hope that your team can pull into first place. We crave that joyous experience, and when we witness a history-making moment, we remember exactly where we were and how we felt when it happened, and we never let it go. The connections between Pearl Jam and the game of baseball will forever run deep, and it's due to an incredible bond of love and dedication that keeps that hope alive. Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of Live on Four Legs. I'd like to thank our guests, Peter Gammons and Jack McDowell, for their contributions. Thank you to our gear guru, Javier Hervas, for the wonderful soundtrack that he's provided. A big thank you to Steve Bennett, Mike Cribbier, and Aaron Redmond for their roles behind the scenes helping consult for this episode. And a big thank you to the rest of our panel for getting involved. Tom Gregory, Ned Lally, Joey Goodsir, David Lipman, Brian Stone, and David Robles. Also, a big shout out to the None But the Brave Bruce Springsteen podcast, who released their own baseball episode this week, featuring acclaimed baseball writers Ken Rosenthal, Pete Abraham, and Anthony Catravince, talking about the baseball connection with the boss. I encourage you all to check that out as well. Next week, we'll be back on our regular routine as we dig into Night 1 from St. Paul, Minnesota in 2023. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast platform of your choice in order to tune in. If you'd like to make a donation to our show, head over to patreon.com/liveonfourlegs to help support us, especially with the upcoming tour in April. It's that time, so let's play 162. Happy opening day to you all. May you experience all the pure joys over a full season of games.